Hey everyone, this is Anna Gressel, and you're listening to the AI Drop, your briefing on how AI is reshaping the future of business law and industry. We bring you fresh drops each week so you never miss a beat. Welcome to the podcast.
Welcome, everyone. I'm super excited today to be recording live from Citi's Robotic and Physical AI Conference. And it is just great to be joined here by Shenwei Zhu, who is a managing director in Citigroup's investment banking division. He's based in New York and covers industrial technology with a focus on automation, robotics, machine vision, industrial IoT, and safety, advanced mobility, and hydrogen fuel cell companies globally. Wow, that is a very broad mandate and really exciting. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
And I'm also here with Lauren Schwartz, who's Chief Information Security Officer and GC of Scientific, which is an enterprise AI services and data solution companies that actually helps build a lot of foundational model engines and infrastructure used to train and evaluate and scale AI models, which is a very, very hot area today. Lauren focuses on ensuring that her company operates with the highest standards of trust and governance and security while enabling the business to move with speed and confidence. Lauren, welcome as well.
Thank you very much.
We're sitting here in Citi's headquarters in what people will not see, but is a beautiful recording studio. And we've all been here for a very, very interesting conference on the most advanced industrial and consumer physical AI products. And I thought maybe I'd just kick us off with what you guys have found most interesting from being here today, because it's really an amazing collection of startups, but also an investor set that's pretty unparalleled.
Yeah, I think I would start with this is the fourth year we're having this conference. We started this in 2023. And by far, this is the largest conference from a number of attendees perspective, right? We have over 350 people registered for this conference. We got a mix of the CEOs, CFOs of the most innovative companies in robotics and physical AI. We've got a large and broad set of investors coming to the conference, all from venture capital firms to growth equity to large mutual fund that does crossover investing, to hedge fund does crossover investing, to a couple some wealth fund here, as well as we've got a couple of strategics, global strategics from industrial technology space are here as well. So what strikes me first is just the breadth and depth of the type of companies, investors that are here, because they found this topic to be super interesting. And this is at the frontier of the AI revolution, right? So, I think this speaks volume of the interest in this topic.
Yeah, I think what we're seeing here, and you can really feel it in the market, is that physical AI is becoming one of the most important areas of investment. And really, it's in some ways the realization of the thesis of artificial intelligence to be able to then operate in physical spaces. But making that jump is, of course, the challenging piece of it, both technologically and also in terms of some of the legal and regulatory issues. Everyone's kind of figuring out, like, how do we actually transpose this from the software space into the physical space? And so it's super interesting to hear all of the founders and CEOs here today talk about how to do that, but then think about all of the different ways that investors are valuing that proposition. And Lauren, I mean, you come from one of the companies that's doing the work in terms of helping that happen, like having the actual data pipeline to help with that realization and that scale. What did you find to be most interesting from your perspective?
Yeah, similar. I think it's really the breadth of the technologies that are present. I came in, this is the first time I've been to this conference, and I understand it's the fourth year of it. It's the first time I've attended. And I thought there would just be a lot of humanoid robots, right? Or self-driving vehicles or something like that. And just seeing that it's not just the breadth of the autonomous technology that's present or the physical AI technology that's here. You've got one company trying to do self-driving airplanes, that are going to be FAA approved. And it was one of the panels that I watched. But you also have chip makers that are here, companies making grippers. You have companies like us that are feeding data into the models and training the AI models. And then, of course, you have all of the investors. And then also it's the level at which everyone can speak about the technology and speak about the landscape out there. Being around like-minded people at this conference and able to speak about it in the level of detail that we can has been just an absolute pleasure.
Yeah, I agree with that. And one of the things I think that people don't always realize is the extent to which physical automation is actually happening in the market today. There are already lights out factories. That's not at all hypothetical. And in fact, we have some clients that have really moved to lights out manufacturing in significant ways over the past decade. But then also thinking about what it means to put the most transformational foundation models into those technologies and then the new kinds of unlock that may create in the market. And very, very interesting to hear differently positioned robotics companies talk about what that means for their industry, what technologies they're watching, and where they think the big technological drivers are going to come from in the future. And so, Shenwei, thank you for having us here.
Of course.
Absolutely.
So let's do a little bit of a lightning round. In a word, is physical AI mature in 2026, or is it still not ready for prime time?
I would say it is in its adolescent phase. So we have certainly gone from demo to deployment. It is being deployed, but is it fully mature? No. But it is maturing rapidly. I mean, I would put it more in dog years than human years. I mean, the company that I interviewed with when I started with Scientific, I've only been at Scientific for 4 months in full candor. And I interviewed with them in December. And the company I then started with in February was a totally different company and is now again a totally different company 4 months later. So the pace at which we are accelerating and changing is massive. So I would put it in dog years, not human years. Are we there yet? No, but we will be very soon.
Shenwei, what do you think?
Yeah, I think, well, robots has been around for a long time. I think the enabling technology, which we today call physical AI, is, I will put it in more infancy. So I just think that where we are in the technology, what can this technology go, is a lot further than what even the most visionary founders have envisioned, right? Because I just think we just don't know what's going to come. And because the technology that's enable us to think about the physical economy, how large the physical economy is, AI so far has really been limited to the digital side of things. But the physical economy is so massive. And even with, I don't know, robots has been around for 70 years, let's call it, right? The penetration has still been so low. So I think this enabling technology that we call physical AI today is at its infancy, and it's growing very, very fast, as Lauren said. We think the amount of capital formation that's going to happen to support this type of growth is going to be massive. And I think we here as Citi, that's why we host this conference, really is we believe that our job is to connect the most innovative companies and the sources of capital and connect them in a way that makes it efficient, that we enable and accelerate this transformation of our society, our industries, just like Citi has done for over 100 years, right? We finance the railroad build out, we finance all these things. This could be the next industrial revolution, and I think we're at the infancy of this stage.
Yeah, one of the most interesting things from my perspective that came out of today's discussion is how much different founders are watching the step change that's happening, not even in their space, but in adjacent spaces, and looking at how they can adopt those technologies and use them as accelerant. So I think, to your point, it's the acceleration is happening so laterally that we're actually beginning to see compound advancement. And that is really cool from my perspective. And so it's an exciting moment where it feels like that's beginning to percolate through the whole market. Well, let's do one more lightning round. Finish the sentence. The robotics company that wins the next decade wins because
They have the best data and they own the data.
That's a spicy answer on data ownership. So that's one thing that I think we see across industries, not only robotics, but this question of like how much the data layer is still the moat for companies and whether that is something that is protectable, particularly in a world of complex partnerships. But Shenwei, finish the sentence. The robotics company that wins the next decade wins because of?
Because they understood the need of the customer. Because I think end of the day, robotics companies and how they generate value is still going to be create value for the customers, especially for the next decade. I think we're still going to be in some way use case specific robotics applications. In some way, I think we're probably not going to be there in the true general purpose robotics sense that they can just do everything that human does, right? So domain knowledge doesn't matter a lot. Understanding of how you create value for your customer to enable them to create value is going to be critical. So The way I always see it, and when I spoke with successful companies, one thing always come up is customers do not really care about the technology itself. Customers really care about how does the technology solve my problem, enable me to generate ROI. So for robotics company in the next decade to be successful, they really have to understand they are solving customers' problem first. They're using the technology as an enabler to do that versus I think the companies who think they have a great technology then go to define a problem to solve is sometimes a more difficult path, right? So that's what I've seen, at least so far today. The companies who has been successful in the space are the companies who truly understands the need of the customer, truly understand how to generate return and ROI for their customers, and use their domain knowledge to accelerate the adoption of the technology at their customer site. That's the company who has been successful.
One of the refrains from today, I think we heard on a few panels, was we're not really selling robots anymore, we're selling outcomes. It's interesting to see that theme come up across so many different sectors. How does that play into how you look at robotics companies and maybe even taking a step back? What are the first things you look at when you're evaluating a company?
But I think go back to my earlier comment about how they generate value for the customers. I think that's sort of the fundamental indicator of whether the company will be successful long term or not. The successful companies that we have spent time with are all the companies and founders, CEOs are truly, truly focused on customers, right? Customer first, technology second in a way. And then I think from an investor perspective, they of course care about how you create value for your customers, how you create ROI for your customer, because that's how you generate revenue. But they also care about how you as a company generate profit. So they also care about how you make money, right? Because not just about creating revenue, but it's also about end of the day, you have to at some point start to make money and create profit. So, we use this term unit economics a lot. To me, this unit economic term means two things. One is unit economic for the customer. How is the customer generating value on deploying each unit of your robot, whatever that is? And you as a company, how you generate unit economics on each of the robot you're making, you're deploying for your customer. I think both are equally important. So you really can, to be a successful company longer term, you really cannot be only doing one or the other. You have to do both. So when we use the term unit economics, we use it in both sense of for the customer and for the company itself.
Shenwei, one of the things you said earlier, which really resonated, was the wide variety of investors we are seeing in the audience today, from sovereign wealth funds to strategics to VCs. And we're seeing the fundraising rounds for robotics companies just hit these huge valuations. How do you think about the valuations in the market right now and the mix of investors?
I think the investors are very broad set of investors. You obviously have venture capital firms funding earlier stage companies in massive funding rounds, right? Both in terms of valuation and the amount of capital they raise. At the same time, and demonstrated by Agility Robotics go public, the de-SPAC transaction that the city just advised on, we're raising over $600 million for the company via this transaction. But that's very different than a venture capital fundraise, right? This is a public transaction. This is committed pipe from pipe investors, all institutional. So I think you are seeing both on the venture world and on the public market side. There is tremendous amount of interest and appetite and capital fund the right companies, to fund the company who has demonstrated commercial traction, who has demonstrated unit economics at both the customer and the company level, and has demonstrated differentiating technology modes. So I think if you're a company with these check marks, I would say, you will be able to find capital across a broader spectrum of capital source. It will then just come down to the question of what stage of company are you at, right? Are you earlier stage, but you have the plan, you have the vision of doing these things, or you're at a later stage company who you already have commercial deployment, you already are getting paid by large industrial commercial customers on deploying robots, and you can maybe closer to being a public company, right? So I think interest and appetite and capital availability there's no shortage of it. It's really about finding the right company with the right technology, the right mindset, the right management team. And then you can figure out what state you are and then go find the correct source of capital.
Lauren, I want to turn to you for a moment and talk about the GC's perspective on this. We've obviously seen companies across all different stages in their life cycle. They sit in different places in the value chain. How do you think about the GC's lens on risk management in the robotics space and in the data space?
Yeah. So obviously, data privacy, I mean, it's all data, right? So data is the biggest area that we're really looking at currently because data is what's feeding the models. So right now, because we are at such an early phase of deployment, there aren't that many robots out there doing things. I mean, that will come. And so that's going to be the other side of the risk profile. Right now, it's what data is feeding the models. Where are you gathering the data? How are you collecting the data? Who owns the data? What are the data privacy implications? Is it biometric data? What data privacy scheme are you under? What are the requirements for that collection? What government needs to be notified? Do they need to be notified? Then contract negotiation, who owns it? In what type of format is the data? How much does the data have to be modified before it's no longer the data and maybe is no longer owned? Is the model weights considered the data, right? Modifications of the data considered still, quote unquote, the data. And then, of course, you have the liability side of it. If you are providing the data and something goes horribly wrong that the robot does downstream, are you liable for that? And have you accounted for that from a product's liability standpoint or a downstream liability standpoint? And then the big issue will then be liability for what the autonomous robot or whatever it is, whatever the instances does, whether it's an autonomous vehicle, whether it's a humanoid, whatever it is. Those are all issues that then need to be managed as well. What's the liability for the actions of an autonomous robot?
That's an area that we've seen a lot of interest in across companies these days as the liability landscape becomes more complex, whether it's in the physical AI space or in the software space. And I think there are always interesting debates in the US about how product liability is going to overlay on the software side, but certainly on the physical side, that's a key driver. How do you think about, from a GC perspective, what advice would you give them in terms of looking at these issues and thinking about where their company sits in the value chain?
Yeah, one mistake I think GCs and I think business people too make is thinking that just because it's AI, it's different. That somehow we're in this totally different world, that AI has changed everything. And really, the rules are ultimately still the same. We still have the same frameworks in place. We're still using the same funding schemes, right? Like when you were mentioning all the different funding schemes, I'm like, yeah, so we're still talking about customer lifetime value. We're still talking about profitability. We're still talking about the same rules. So it's the same on the legal side. We're still talking about data privacy rights. We're still talking about products liability. We're still talking about these same basic schemes. So just because we don't have a specific regulatory scheme that applies to AI, unlike in the EU where they have the EU AI Act, that doesn't necessarily apply specifically to physical AI, we can apply what we do have. And so I would suggest any new GC just takes a step back and use the tools that they have to apply the regimens that they know to what they have in front of them and just recognize that it's really not all that different from the other technologies that they're used to managing and dealing with.
It's one of the things that we often say about our practice. There are certainly AI laws that are being passed every day, but the number of AI laws that we're applying in our analysis every day is dwarfed by the number of non-AI laws and traditional legal frameworks. That is really where a lot of the meat on the bones is in the legal space. So much of it is just risk hearing and just getting your arms around things. But we've talked about risk for a bit. I just want to go back to value for a moment. When you guys think about the value in the physical AI and robotic space, it's really hard, I think, as Lauren mentioned, to not focus on data because data is driving so much of the discussion right now and is also creating such a flywheel in terms of other value opportunities for companies. How do you guys think about what data is valuable in physical AI? I know that's what Scientific really focuses on in many respects, but Shenwei, I expect this is something you're thinking a lot about, like the different sources of data value. How would you segment that, and whether it's simulated data or real world data?
there has been a lot of discussions on this particular topic today at the conference, and obviously broadly speaking in the ecosystem. Data is, I would say broadly speaking, is being viewed as a bottleneck for, at this moment at least, a bottleneck to physical AI advancement and scale up, right? So partly it's the availability of high quality data.
Oh, Lauren is showing us a water bottle that says, "We solve the bottleneck."
Bottleneck, yeah.
Love it.
Yeah. So I think it is true. This term is being used a lot, right? This is about data availability of high quality usable data is a bottleneck for physical AI because different from, large language models where I would say the availability of high quality data is a lot. I don't even know how many multiples and higher, more available than the physical world. It's a real, I don't want to say problem, but it's a real bottleneck they try to solve. And it's, to answer your question, what type of data is what is high quality or usable? It really depends on the company and what use case they're trying to solve for and, how they're approaching technology. So all the way from watching a video to learn something to having a remote controlled operation to have somebody wearing VR sets and doing the simulation or somebody wearing a bodysuit and try to do these repetitive motion to teach the robot how to do that. All these data have its place in physical AI, which makes it very complex and very expensive to collect and to filter and then to feed into the model to improve. And so I think that's the one uniqueness of physical AI compared to sort of large language model. So I certainly agree. I think data is could be a bottleneck, but also can be a moat, right? So if you're a company that enable other folks to solve that problem, I think you're going to be at a very, very interesting place in the marketplace.
Absolutely. And it definitely depends on, like Shenwei said, the specific use case. So are you trying to solve for something that a human typically does? Will the robot be doing something a human does, in which case the human use cases are going to be your most valuable. And that's where you have egocentric data, where a human wears head-mounted or a wrist-mounted camera or something like that to collect the data. And we're collecting video data of these repetitive movements of actions that then get uploaded into the repository and annotated and then put into the AI model to train the model. Or is this something that a machine normally does, in which case then maybe simulated data is okay to use or something like that? Or is it something that is for a human to do, but it's too dangerous for a human to do, in which case you need to use simulated data? And so going by what the use case is certainly something that we factor in when we decide how we're going to collect data. Also, location, cost, right? These are all things that we factor in. We collect data on a global scale at Scientific. We have offices all over the world: China, Malaysia, Singapore, Europe, India, US. And so we're collecting everywhere in the world. And sometimes that comes down to cost bases. It's cheaper to collect in some countries than others. Sometimes it comes down to their data privacy schemes. It's easier to collect in some places than others. Cross-border data transfer issues, right? Those kinds of things as well factor into those considerations. Sometimes you have client preferences as well. Those factor in certainly when a client hires us for a specific purpose or a specific area, specific jurisdiction. Those all factor in as well. But if you can do it at scale, that's really, and again, going to that point, that's the moat, being able to do it at scale.
Shenwei, I'd love to hear your thoughts on successful robotics companies exiting over the next few years. What do you think makes a company a natural acquisition target versus an IPO candidate? You've already talked a little bit about maturity, but what other features do you look for?
I think people are looking for, right, so whether it's technology modes, whether it's customer modes, whether it's data modes, I think particularly in the sense of being an acquisition target, the strategic partners who are looking to acquire a robotics company are really looking at how do I then help them to take the next step to accelerate, to scale up, right? And that in that process, the moat become extremely important. And so I think from an M&A perspective, probably the number one focus is going to be moats. And there can be many sorts of moats.
I would agree with that. I mean, I think that's what we're hearing. We've never heard the term moat more often than in the last 12 months. So I think that is absolutely the key right now.
And Lauren, looking across the globe, To what extent do you think that the regulatory landscape needs to become more certain for companies operating in this space? And do you have a wish list of regulations that you would either enact or change to create more certainty?
I mean, I think right now, if I had a wish list, my wish list is not incredibly long, but I would like to see more predictability on the liability side in terms of what does happen on the downstream liability. That's something that I think right now is being managed on the contractual side, but we don't really know how those contracts are going to hold up. We don't really know in a catastrophic instance how those will be litigated, what ends up happening. And so I would like, just as we have done with products liability in the past, to see have regulators step in and say, here is how this is going to work in the AI space, where you have autonomous decision making, because that's the one area AI is actually different. And so I think we need some help with that.
Yeah, it's not just autonomous vehicles getting into crashes. It's really now becoming every industry, because we have on-device AI, frankly, in so many industries where there is really a product liability overlay, but it is often underpriced, I think, as an area of focus, and just a completely fascinating one. I'm going to close out on one final question. If you could give some advice to the founders in the room, either from the investor seat or from the legal seat, what top insight or lesson would you offer to them?
For me, I think data is the product, or data is at a minimum a part of the product. So don't look at it as an afterthought or as something that you just have the lawyer add into a data privacy agreement at the end. You have to be thinking about the rights angle, ownership angle. You have to be thinking about these things upfront in a term sheet, in the initial negotiations, in the initial strategy, how you're pricing it. These can't be afterthoughts that come just when the lawyers get involved. And get the lawyers involved early. We can be your strategic partners in this. We can help you through.
I think one of the things founders may not be thinking about is when they're raising capital, I do think it's important to think about who are the investors and can they add value other than just the dollar amount. While a dollar is a dollar and it funds the operations, it's important. But I think the type of investors, who they are, how can they add value beyond the capital itself, I think is very important. And in my job, I've seen some of the investors are super helpful to their portfolio companies in the sense of providing them with not just sort of advice and guidance, but give them the connections they may be looking for in order to penetrate a commercial opportunity, right? So I do think to think about where the capital are from, particularly on the institutional side of things. There are, as I said, there's such a broad spectrum of investors to really think about this as, I would say, more strategically planning where you're going to raise capital and thinking ahead of time, right? So from the way we advise companies, we will tell them, like, if you're thinking about going public at some point you should start thinking about bringing some crossover investors to start building that potential public company investor base, because they do invest in private companies and ultimately they will become your anchor investor in public markets, right? So yes, they may not be investing in you today and you are spending time with them knowing that, but it takes time to get them comfortable, to show them the track record, to build their trust. And it just takes, I think, to take strategic planning, thinking about capital raise versus, I need a capital next week. Let me go try to raise that capital. So I think to be more strategic, think about who you're going to raise capital from. How can they be helpful to you beyond the capital itself? And how can they be longer term helping to achieve what you ultimately want to achieve as a founder and entrepreneur? I think that's incredibly important.
It was amazing advice. Thank you guys so much for joining us today. And it was really fun to have this conversation live.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's today's drop. Thanks for listening. If you'd like to hear more of the AI Drop, hit subscribe and join us each week for fresh insights on what's shaping the future of AI. This podcast is for informational purposes only, and it does not constitute legal advice or establish an attorney-client relationship. It may be considered attorney advertising, so prior results do not guarantee a similar outcome. The views expressed here are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views of their firms, organizations, or clients. For more information, please visit freshfields.com.